up, my groovy ghoulies? Welcome to this week's episode of Video Ferox, where we're in the middle of Blaxploitation History Month. Tonight, the fear of the year is here with Dr. Black and Mr. Hyde. See, it even says it right there on the cover, right there. So, we'll roll the trailer and you get down with your bad selves.
No, you can't try that serum on a human.
A monster he could not control had taken over his very soul. A screaming demon rages inside, turning him into Mr. Hyde.
This is no nightmare, Doctor. You're real.
Super strong, supernatural, and super bad.
That's a cross between the abominable snowman and Willie the werewolf.
Indestructible. Nothing can stop him. Not bombs, bullets, or bulldozers. No man alive could take that guy. But he's on his feet when he hits the street. Dr. Black and Mr. Hyde. His victim thinks she's tricked him, but she hasn't a prayer when he leaps through the air. Shot full of lead and he still ain't dead. Dr. Black and Mr. Hyde. Don't give him no sass or he'll kick your ass. Jump back, Jack, for your skull is cracked. The barflies are trying, but their bodies keep flying. The dude stood tall till his butt hit the wall. When the boys go rushing, Mr. Hyde starts crushing. The crowd is hushing as the blood comes gushing.
Don't just stand there like a bunch of dumb asses. Get in!
There's a heel behind the wheel when Hyde takes his ride. No man can survive when he shifts into drive. It ain't no jive trying to stay alive. Silky won't revive from his final nosedive. From the first verse to the last blast, it's Dr. Black and Mr. Hyde, starring Bernie Casey, Rosalind Cash, Stu Gillum, directed by William Blacula Crane. Dr. Black and Mr. Hyde.
Okay, kids, that was the trailer to Dr. Black and Mr. Hyde from 1976, starring Bernie Casey, who, I mean, you know, from like Star Trek and Revenge of the Nerds and a bunch of other stuff. He's a long-time character actor.
Oh, yeah. What was your take on it?
So, on paper, all of this should be fine. It was like, okay, it's got a strong cast and a good director. I did not like it. Oh my God, it was... Okay, I wouldn't necessarily say that I hated it, but it was definitely not interesting. It was dull. Just dull.
I mean, I suppose it could have been a bit more highly charged, too low-key for what it was. It felt like a TV movie of a kind of like a doctor drama, like a Marcus Welby episode with more science.
Okay, I don't want to compare Blacula to this, even though the parallels are really super strong, because obviously they're cashing in on Blacula taking a, you know, public domain monster and turning it into their Blaxploitation. So I don't want to compare the two movies too closely, but Mama Walde in Blacula and Scream is a sympathetic character. Even though he's a monster, even though he's doing things that you don't want him to do, you're on his side. It's like, I want you to get the cure. I want you to get your girlfriend back. I want you to get Tina back. There's none of that here. They needed to do that.
I was expecting a Black Mummy after this, which would make sense, or a Black Werewolf or something.
Okay, so you were thumbs up, thumbs down, kind of meh?
It's more than meh, but less than I liked it. I don't hate it. But I found it interesting.
Yeah, that's the same thing for me. I just can't get above a meh on this movie. So why don't we just get on to the actual spoiler section, and we'll tell you all about this goddamn thing.
Okay.
All right.
Silent breed is people!
The one person that I was shocked to see in the credits was Stan Winston.
Really?
Oh no, you didn't notice Stan Winston in the fucking credits? Yeah, well, of course, you know guys who know Stan Winston is. You know, Mr. T2, Mr. Jurassic Park, Mr. fucking special effects man from hell.
He must have worked on this around the same time he worked on autobiography of Jane Pittman.
But the weird thing is about having Stan Winston on board was that I didn't think the effects looked very good. I mean, he did the makeup for Mr. Hyde, and The problem is, it's just pancake makeup making Bernie Casey look like a white dude. They put some streaks in his afro and gave him those Lou Ferrigno contacts.
Bernie Casey's Mr. Hyde reminds me of all the frode, white skin, white-eyed vampires from the Charlton Heston
From the Omega Man.
Yeah. That was back at around the same period, more or less, when makeup effects were doing similar things to the actors, you know, the gray skin and the white eyes and stuff like that. That kind of feels like a carryover from that period.
They're still learning their craft. Okay, I'll forgive him. But if you're going in expecting a giant T-Rex, you know, being badass, no, you're not going to get that with this movie. The other thing that I thought was really weird, and as the opening credits are unfolding, you've of course got the soundtrack playing. It is the least funky soundtrack I've ever heard for a blaxploitation movie.
Well, it's rather generic, yeah.
It's very generic. It's closer to your John Carpenter movies and your kind of synth-heavy stuff.
Well, I was thinking it felt kind of like a detective movie, like a low-rent detective film from the 60s or something like that. That it has a kind of feel of the private dick, you know, in his office, and you know, shit goes down. He's got to get down onto the dirty, dark streets kind of feel. Except it's a monster movie.
So the story is, as you've gathered from the title of the episode, a more or less retelling of the Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde story by Robert Louis Stevenson. So you have Bernie Casey as a mad scientist who's desperate to cure cirrhosis of the liver. And he develops this formula that when he injects into people, they turn into angry white men and start attacking everybody around him. And then he injects it in himself and then goes on a killer rampage. And that's more or less the story. He has this serum, this prototype serum that he's working on, and he injects it into like some lab mice.
He basically watches the rats, or a mice rat, watches this fur change color in front of him. Goes from being like a black and white rat to being an all white one.
Yeah, and it's got the albino eyes and all that stuff.
And none of the other rats will get anywhere near it. They go to the other end of the cage, and they're like holding on to each other in like complete terror. They want to get the hell out of there.
And the rat is like, yeah, I'm going to get you, motherfucker. And then, of course, the doctor, he's like, oh, that's kind of odd. I wonder what's going on with that.
And so he and his partner, they take off, they go do some shit, then they come back, and all the other rats are dead. And it's very graphic, you know, they've clearly been chewed to death.
He goes and he works on every other day down at the Watts Free Clinic and Thrift Shop. The doctor, he goes in to see some clients and he's talking with this prostitute, and there's a giant poster of Superfly on the wall. What?
There's all kinds of weird stuff in there, you know, posters, and there's little kids running around, and there's weird-ass art on the wall and stuff, and it made me go, this is definitely a black neighborhood.
And so the prostitute, she is very, you know, oh, you just come down here every couple of days to make yourself feel better. You're not a black dude. You're really just a rich white dude in a black skin. You drive a white man's car. You think white man's thoughts. You have no connection to the community. And he's like, oh, nigga, please?
Yeah, you would expect that to come out of like the pimp, you know, talking to, you know, the other pimp in this movie.
It felt very forced, like, look, I'm really one of you. Look at me.
Yeah, say, using street slang in that part of Watts where everybody's poor.
Meanwhile, he's driving a goddamn Rolls around.
Yeah, he's driving a Rolls and lives in what looks like an Ennis Wright house. You know, like one of those really highly developed, overly done mansions, street mansions.
And then, of course, the albino rat, he's died too because he's died of the serum, and Doctor is like, this is not good. I better try some human trials and see if that works for me better. And they have this old lady from a nursing home. She has like a heart problem or something, and they wheel her in, and they're like, oh, man, this lady's not going to make it past the night. Fine, go put her in room 7. We'll deal with her, and maybe she'll make it, maybe she won't. They call Dr. Pride, and he's like, oh, wait a second. Here's my opportunity. Takes the serum, injects in her, and let's see if that works. And right there, instantly, I lose any sort of sympathy for him.
Maybe she would have gotten better. You know, why are you doing this on a person whose immune system is so compromised that you may actually kill them with this shit? And it's a case of taking what he thought was a goner, but you never know. People sometimes come back from the brink. But he's never going to know because he basically killed her a lot faster than she would have gone had he left her alone. So that makes him complicit in her death. He basically murdered her in the name of science and then used science as an excuse to do what he did.
And this is the important social political message of the movie. Now, you've heard of the Tuskegee syphilis experiments, right? From like 1939. Oh, no, 1932, I'm sorry. And what happened was, it was down in the South, down in Tuskegee, and the government, they started this experiment where they were getting a whole bunch of black, poor migrant workers to come in. It's like, hey, do you guys have bad blood? Well, come in and we'll like monitor you and give you treatment and stuff like that. But the treatments were all 100% placebo.
Any of the people that came in that had syphilis, they said, well, we've got this thing we're trying, it's experimental, and we think that it'll cure your problem. Of course it didn't, and the men that had syphilis then ended up passing the syphilis to other people because they thought they'd been cured.
This went on for 40 fucking years, till 1973. And the only reason that it became known to the public was that somebody from the New York Times found out about it and ran a story about it, and the public outcry was so great that they've been doing this for 40 fucking years to hundreds of people that they had to shut the program down.
It's basically one of those kind of things, out of sight, out of mind. If you didn't know about it, it might still be happening, which is why media oftentimes gets censored, or they get stripped of their power, or they get shut down because somebody didn't like the fact somebody found out, and they have a moral compass that actually works.
And they were going to run the experiment all the way up till these people died. So it could have been going for into the 80s and into the 90s. Because I think the last dude, Clinton apologized for the whole experiment and apologized to one of the last survivors. He was like 98, 95, something like that. And that was like in the mid-90s. So this shit could have been going on for another 20 fucking years.
It could still be going on if nobody found out about it.
Exactly. So this social climate of, this had only happened like 3 years before the movie was made. So I get the parallel between the syphilis experiment and the Dr. Casey going, it's like, well, here, take this serum. And the prostitute's like, no, I don't want to take that serum. It's like, well, what if I made you? That shit gets super creepy.
So Rosalind Cash's character, Dr. Billy Worth, I know I'm going to forget that in a minute. It's so generic. So they have a relationship. Him and her and Dr. Pride have a relationship. It's kind of loose, They're friends. It could be romantic, but they never actually pursue it. She comes off as highly supportive of the doctor, and when things start falling apart, once he starts using the serum on people, she's like, "What? Are you effing serious? You're gonna use this in human trials? That's immoral." And of course, using them on animals isn't. But she gets really upset, in fact, terrified when he says, I'm gonna use this on somebody, and then he goes and does it. And she said, "I can't fucking believe you just did that."
And she found out because she was looking at the samples and like, wait a second, there's 2 samples missing. What the hell's going on? Confronts him about it. It's like, dude, where'd the samples go? And it's like, don't worry about it, baby. I got it all covered under control. It's like, you're going to fucking scuttle my career too, bitch.
And she's completely right to do that. In fact, when Linda was at the doctor's house and he's threatening her with the serum, she says, "I'm going to expose her ass." And he's like, "You don't want to do that." It's kind of like, "Don't make me angry. You wouldn't like me when I'm angry." It boils down to this guy has already infected himself with this shit and his mind's going. I mean, he went from being kind of resolute about doing good to seeing what he could do after he'd gotten the serum. I mean, it's no longer about just doing good. It's about how it feels, because he said, you got to feel the power. You feel great after you take this. He's really trying to gin up a feeling of excitement with somebody who doesn't want anything to do with it, and then he leans on her, and she rightfully got the fuck out of there.
So you have this white man running around terrorizing the black community, and the implications thereof. So yeah, this is kind of a socially charged movie.
And the funny thing is, he doesn't look white. He's just pale. He's just ashen. I mean, he's still got a fro. He's still got those black features. It's just that his skin, he looks dead.
He goes to try and find the prostitute that he was treating at the free clinic, and he goes to her hangout, this lounge, and he goes there, and of course his pimp is like, "Who the hell are you? Get the hell out of my place!" And he just starts wrecking shit all over the place, just throwing people around and just getting all basically, crazy white man on them.
He cleans house. Now, the interesting thing about this is there's actually two pimps. So basically, she had quit working for this black pimp, Silky. And this pimp is beholden to a white pimp who comes in with the coke. And it's like, he wants Silky's former prostitute to work for him, be part of his stable. And he'll give Silky more coke if he convinces her, leans on her, to be one of his whores.
And he'll cut her off stone cold. He's like, "No more coke for you if you don't get me my whore."
And this is when he got Silky. Silky had two white prostitutes in his car. One of them got out and was starting to, standing in front of this building, and she starts walking away. Well, he comes out of nowhere, out of the bushes next to this building, grabs her. Silky sees that, jumps out of the car and goes after him, and they get into a little short fist fight.
And then, of course, after the Silky runs away, he's like, "Oh yeah, I'm just going to run your ass down in my rolls." And he chases Silky around in his rolls and smashes up against the wall.
Something I saw coming right off the bat was the second prostitute. He grabs her and tosses her in the street and then runs over her backward with his car. And I was like, "Oh, God damn it."
That's the movie that I want. I want this kind of... The movie takes itself too goddamn seriously. And if it had just had this sort of sense of fun, killing Silky and running over the prostitute with the rolls, then I could have gotten behind the movie, but it's just too...
It's a 90-minute movie, so you cut out the 15 minutes of stuff, and then you've got a lean 75-minute movie that's more thrilling. You can cut the drama, you can leave a little bit of it in because we need that character development, but we don't need it to drag.
I need character development that actually pays off, that actually gets me invested in the characters versus I'm just standing around and talking because talking is cheap versus having to set up the camera a bunch of times.
And I think they were trying to strike a balance, but they missed the entire tone of this movie as it should have been more exploitation. I think they were trying to skirt the line between a pure exploitation movie and a drama. They were trying to make it like an episode of Marcus Welby or, some TV show like that, or Dr. Kildare or something, Mannix or whatever. But they should have gone more for the scares. It was pretty arch. I mean, it's arch in a more realistic way that you've got this build-up of tension and release instead of just always doing the "arrgh" thing, which he doesn't really do except when he's around prostitutes.
The bits where the monster shows up are the most interesting bits. The bit where he's wrecking everything in the Moonlight Lounge, the bit where he's going after Silky and trying to run his ass down and run down the whore. And I love those bits. Those are the bits of excitement. It's just the endless talking and the character development that I don't really give two shits about, that I hate.
Dr. Pride takes this prostitute out to dinner. He wants to get her out of this life of prostitution, but he really wants to experiment on her. And so they go out to dinner, then he takes her back to his place, and she thinks, "Oh, you're going to just get me to pay the check." He's like, no, I'm straight up with you, baby. So they go back, park in front of this big mansion. She says, "You live here?" It's like, "Oh, yeah, actually, I grew up here. This used to be a high-priced prostitute's whorehouse. My mom and me lived in the back in this small room. My mother used to clean the place and service all the women. And once it got, dissolved, he basically inherited the place. Studied medicine and all that, must have made a ton of money, and got the house."
And his mother died from alcoholism because she was just so put on. It's like, my life is cleaning toilets in a whorehouse. What am I living for? And that's why the monster, when he goes out and about, he has this hatred of whores and pimps because he's got this ingrained from youth from his mother dying because of whores and pimps. And the scene where he's breaking down and revealing all to his prostitute friend is supposed to be heartbreaking and it's supposed to be this deep, what am I doing with my life? I'm this monster, I'm doing this and that and all this. And it just falls flat. It just seems so ham-fisted and cartoonish and goofy. And not goofy in the good way.
One of my problems with this movie is the framing. It's very amateurishly done. I mean, they do... One of the biggest faux pas when you're filming a scene is to have too much of a wide shot or too many close-ups, and the sound is flat. It sounds like they recorded the sound live in the room, no ADR, so it sounds amateur.
Oh, they can't afford ADR on a movie like this.
They couldn't. But you could have had some guys stand in a closet and redo their lines or some shit.
And it's weird that the movie looks so flat and kind of boring and pedestrian, like you said, because the cinematographer was the second unit director on fucking Star Wars.
Like I said, a lot of people weren't quite up here yet. They were kind of here, somewhere down here. Some movies that are absolute crap have, begat tons of great filmmakers. They come out of one movie doing picking up trash or some shit, and then the director says, "Hey, you wanna do the camera?" For instance, Dean Cundy.
Well, that's the core thesis of the Roger Corman School, where Roger says, "Hey, kid, you got potential. Give me, here's a script. Come back in 6 weeks with 3 reels and show me what you got." And so many people started off like that. So I'm not necessarily dunking on that, people who just getting their start do poor work. I'm willing to forgive that. But it just doesn't come together in this movie for me.
That would be my thesis on something like this when you watch a lot of movies. I mean, but given what we're capable of doing today, back then, a budget stretched thin is stretched even more thin when you got name actors, especially if they're like stage actors. And they tend to cost more than a lot of people who started in cinema, because cinemas kind of shoot from the hip and you can always redo shit. Whereas on stage, you got to know your stuff front to back when you're in front of like 1,000 people doing stuff night after night.
I think what it comes down to for me is just that it's a weak script. You've got instances of characters being dumb as a sack of hammers. So the monster goes into the club and wrecks the fuck out of the place, and somebody slashes his arm, and he oh, I gotta go, and splits, and everybody's like, "Get that motherfucker!" And they all chase him out into the parking lot, but the problem is that he's turned back into the Doctor at this point. And he's leaning up over by this sign, and he's clutching his arm, and he's all like, "Oh, what the fuck just happened?" And they come running up, and it's like, "Hey man, did you see a really big white dude come through here?" And you're like, I don't know what happened. And they take off, and it's like, okay, he's wearing the same clothes, he's got the same cut on his arm, he's essentially the dude who you're looking for, and they're just like, "Nope, not us."
Although, to be fair, and I'm going to play devil's advocate, even though it's really thin, you take off like 5 seconds afterward, you get these guys catch up with you, and you look completely different physically. I mean, same clothing, same fro, same height and build and shit. And so naturally you're going to think, well, that's not the same guy, because this other guy had white skin. Even though he looked ashen, this guy didn't have enough time to take off all this makeup and stuff.
I guess, maybe, but...
It's really thin, like I said.
Or, okay, how about this one then? Hey, I've injected my prototype serum into 2 people, and they've both died, or a person and a rat, and they've both died. I know what the next logical conclusion is. I'm going to inject it into myself. I'm sorry, that's just fucking stupid.
It's kind of dumb. They were cramming so many monster movies in here. We've got Jack the Ripper, with all the murders happen at night to prostitutes. We've got Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde with the turn into another guy. We've got King Kong.
At the fucking end of the movie,
yeah. Climbing up the tower and surrounded by helicopters, which was really good. They had helicopters shots.
That's where all the budget went.
Renting a helicopter, usually like $2,000 a day or something like that.
So what happens is that the Doctor goes and gets his prostitute friend back to his mansion that used to be a whorehouse and says, "Hey, baby, I got some serum for you that'll really just get you going." And she's like, "Oh, hell no." Runs out, almost gets hit by the car. Goes to the cops, eventually says, "Hey, man, this guy's the one that's causing the trouble." They wind up investigating him. They draw him into a trap. She draws him into a trap, gets him to the Watts Tower. The cops show up, and all of a sudden we turn into Frankenstein and the mob with the pitchforks and the torches, and he starts, bad, fire, bad, get away from me. Runs into the Watts Tower and starts climbing at it, and then they start sending the helicopters and start shooting at him, so there's where your King Kong ending is.
Mm-hmm. The cops don't believe the prostitute at first when she says she knows who the killer is. And let's face it, I mean, when you're in a situation like that and everybody on the street comes in and says, "I know who did it, I know."
And you come into this cops with a crazy story that, hey man, this black dude's turned into a crazy white man.
So when Linda goes out for the night, her friend, who she's friends with another black woman who has 2 kids. And she gives them money. She dotes over them a little bit. And her friend's like, oh, thank you, bless you. She gives her some money, like a 10 spot or 20 or something, for one of the kids who's having a birthday. And so she goes out, and Dr. Pride comes into the apartment. Well, she freaks out and starts running back upstairs. And Dr. Pride starts running like an ape, like kind of like this. "Arr!" And there's your Mummy reference. He starts kicking in doors of every place in here, interrupting like a bunch of people watching TV.
There's some dudes having sex.
Yeah, just kicking in every door. Finally gets to hers, and she's already got out the window and down the fire escape. Well, he kills her friend, strangles her to death on the staircase. And that kind of reminded me of Psycho a little bit. You got a staircase killing. So she starts running, blah, 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 blah. But she's smart. She takes something and breaks a window, like a bottle, breaks a window of a furniture store and gets in there and hides. And the doctor, he's checking every single doorway. He takes every door he comes across and kicks it in, grabs it, checks it, gives her enough time to run away and hide inside of this place. And she's hiding at the back of this building. There's all these power tools, like a table saw and all this other shit. I'm thinking, is this like Chekhov's gun? Is one of these going to get used here?
And that's the problem that I have with the movie, is they has all this potential, all this, okay, this could be interesting, and it fails to capitalize on any of it.
You could almost take a Lucio Fulci movie and pay off the power tools thing in there. Do Dr. Pride standing there going, I remember when I did this, grab. Ah!
Yeah, that's exactly what this movie, okay, I'm being angry at the movie for what it isn't, it's supposed to being what it is. Yeah. All right, you got any final thoughts?
I would say if you're going to watch this movie, just be aware that there's a lot of talking. If you're going to get actors to do something specific, make sure that when they do it, that they're doing it so well that no matter how bad the rest of the movie is, they can carry that scene.
Temper your expectations, because the trailer sells this as an action with a lot of comedy.
It did its job. It got butts in the seats. It made money and ran.
All right, we'll catch you next week then.
Hungry, but the ordinary things don't seem to appeal? Then try one of our frozen delicacies. They're taste treats that hit the spot, refreshing and cooling without being too filling, satisfying without being too rich. Give yourself and the whole gang a taste dividend. Select the frozen treat that pleases you.
All right, Dr. Black's got to make a house call. Bye-bye. Next week, you know it was inevitable. It was in the cards that we were going to eventually someday watch a Dolomite movie. That's right, next week it's going to be Rudy Ray Moore in The Human Tornado. So join us here for that. Drop me an email. thevideonastyproject@gmail.com is the address. And until next week, stay funky.